In this episode, we look at a side of AI governance that often gets treated like a separate human resources topic, even though it directly changes risk and outcomes. What happens to the workforce when AI is introduced into real work? Beginners sometimes picture workforce impact as a simple question of whether jobs are replaced, but the more common reality is that jobs shift, responsibilities blur, and new risks appear because people are asked to work differently without enough preparation. When those shifts happen quietly, teams make mistakes, create unsafe dependencies on outputs, and sometimes treat AI as a substitute for judgment rather than a tool that needs oversight. Workforce impact analysis is about understanding how work changes, who is affected, and what new failure modes appear when tasks are reorganized around AI. If you can map those changes early, you can design training, controls, and governance that keep people safe and keep the organization honest about what the technology can and cannot do. The goal is to analyze workforce impacts in a way that reduces harm, not in a way that spreads fear. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good place to begin is to understand what job shifts usually look like when AI enters a workflow, because they rarely appear as sudden elimination of entire roles. More often, AI absorbs a portion of repetitive tasks, like drafting, summarizing, categorizing, or recommending next steps, and then the human role changes into reviewing, deciding, and handling exceptions. That sounds like an upgrade, but it can also be a trap because exception handling and review work can be more cognitively demanding than the original task. If people are not trained for that change, they may skim, accept outputs too quickly, or miss subtle errors that would have been obvious when they produced the work themselves. Job shifts also change what gets valued, because speed can become easier, while careful reasoning becomes harder to maintain under pressure. Beginners should notice that risk increases when the new role is not clearly defined, because people will revert to old habits, like trusting their own work, even when they are now mostly trusting a tool. A workforce analysis asks what tasks are changing, what skills those tasks require, and whether the organization is setting people up to succeed. Another important concept is role risk, which means the risk that a role, as it is currently designed, will cause errors or harm when paired with AI. Role risk is not about blaming people for making mistakes, but about recognizing that certain role designs invite predictable failure. For example, if a role becomes responsible for approving outputs but is given little time, unclear criteria, and no authority to request changes, that role becomes a rubber stamp even if the person is competent and well-intentioned. Similarly, if a role is told to use AI outputs but is also measured on speed and volume, the incentives can push the person to overtrust outputs and skip verification. Beginners should understand that risk management includes incentive management, because behavior follows what is rewarded. Role risk analysis asks questions like whether people understand the limitations of outputs, whether they have a clear escalation path, and whether they are empowered to pause or challenge. If the role is designed without those supports, the organization is effectively building risk into the job description. Capability gaps are the third piece, and they are often the most overlooked because organizations assume basic training is enough. A capability gap is the difference between what a role must be able to do in an AI-enabled workflow and what the person currently knows and can reliably perform. When work shifts from producing content to validating content, the required capability includes evaluation skills, such as spotting inconsistencies, checking assumptions, and knowing when something feels wrong. When work shifts from making decisions to supervising decision support, the capability includes understanding decision boundaries and recognizing when a human must take control. Beginners should also recognize that capability includes emotional and social skills, like being comfortable questioning an output even when it looks polished, and being comfortable escalating concerns without fear. A common gap is that people do not know how to express uncertainty, so they either accept outputs or reject them without a clear rationale. Workforce impact analysis identifies these gaps so training and governance can be built around them, rather than assuming people will figure it out on their own. To analyze workforce impacts, it helps to think in terms of tasks rather than job titles, because job titles can hide what people actually do. Two people with the same title may do very different work, and the impact of AI depends on which tasks are affected. A task-centered analysis asks which tasks are being automated, which tasks are being accelerated, which tasks are becoming review tasks, and which tasks are becoming exception-handling tasks. It also asks which tasks are moving across roles, such as when a technical team is asked to make judgment calls that were previously owned by business staff, or when business staff are asked to interpret outputs without technical context. Beginners should notice that task movement can create accountability confusion because decisions may shift without clear ownership. If an AI tool suggests an action and a person follows it, who is responsible for the outcome? The tool owner, the user, or the manager who required the tool? Workforce analysis makes those boundaries visible so governance can assign ownership and build controls around the new reality. A workforce analysis should also consider the difference between augmentation and automation, because the risk profile changes depending on which is happening. Augmentation means the tool supports human work, but the human remains the primary decision maker and remains responsible for verifying and applying judgment. Automation means the tool replaces a human step, which increases the need for monitoring, testing, and incident response because errors can propagate without a human checkpoint. Many organizations accidentally drift from augmentation to automation, not by formal decision, but because people get used to the tool and gradually stop checking it. Beginners should recognize that this drift is a workforce phenomenon as much as a technology phenomenon, because it is driven by habits, pressure, and trust. When you analyze workforce impact, you should identify where human checkpoints exist, whether those checkpoints are realistic under time pressure, and whether people are trained to use them. If checkpoints are weak or purely symbolic, the organization may be automating without admitting it, which can create unmanaged risk. Another workforce impact that deserves attention is cognitive load, because AI can change not only what people do, but how mentally demanding their work becomes. When people produce work from scratch, they engage deeply with the problem, which helps them notice errors. When they review AI-generated outputs, they may become passive, and passivity reduces error detection. This is a common human tendency, and it shows up in many contexts, like over-relying on navigation systems and losing situational awareness. In AI-enabled work, cognitive load can also increase because people must evaluate outputs, consider uncertainty, and handle edge cases that the tool cannot handle. Those edge cases can be emotionally stressful, especially when outcomes affect people. Beginners should understand that cognitive load is a risk factor because high load increases mistakes. A workforce analysis should ask whether roles have enough time, support, and training to handle the new cognitive demands. If the answer is no, mitigation may require redesigning workflows, not just adding training. Workforce impacts also show up as changes in collaboration and communication, because AI can change how teams share information and how decisions are justified. In some workplaces, people may start relying on AI outputs as if they are neutral facts, using them to settle debates without examining assumptions. That can silence legitimate concerns, especially from junior staff who may feel less confident challenging a polished output. In other cases, AI can increase fragmentation, where individuals use tools privately and then present conclusions without sharing the underlying reasoning. Beginners should see that governance depends on transparency, and transparency depends on team norms about how decisions are discussed and documented. Workforce analysis should examine whether teams are developing healthy habits, such as explaining how outputs were used, what was verified, and what limitations were considered. If those habits are missing, the organization may be building a culture where decisions look data-driven but are actually opaque, which increases both internal risk and external scrutiny risk. A practical workforce impact area is role boundary risk, which happens when people are asked to operate outside their expertise because AI seems to make it easy. For example, a non-technical role may be encouraged to use AI for security or compliance judgment, assuming the tool provides reliable guidance. Alternatively, technical staff may be asked to make legal or policy decisions based on tool outputs, assuming the tool captures regulatory nuance. Beginners should understand that AI can blur boundaries and create misplaced confidence, which can lead to incorrect decisions that are hard to unwind. Workforce analysis should identify where responsibilities are shifting across domains and whether there is a clear escalation path to specialists. If escalation is unclear, people will make decisions they should not be making, especially when deadlines are tight. The goal is not to prevent cross-functional work, but to ensure that cross-functional work includes proper oversight and that decision ownership remains clear. When role boundaries are respected and supported, the organization reduces the chance of harmful decisions driven by tool-enabled overreach. You should also analyze the risk of dekilling, which is the gradual loss of human skill when tasks are outsourced to tools. Deskilling can be subtle because short-term productivity may improve, while long-term capability declines. If people stop practicing core skills, they become less able to detect errors, less able to handle exceptions, and less able to operate when tools fail. For AI governance, dekilling is a risk because it reduces resilience, and it can lead to a future where the organization cannot function safely without the tool. Beginners should notice that resilience is an important part of safety because systems fail, change, and sometimes must be paused during incidents. A workforce analysis should ask which skills are at risk of erosion, whether there are opportunities for humans to maintain those skills, and whether training reinforces judgment rather than replacing it. This does not mean people must avoid tools. It means the organization must be intentional about preserving critical human competencies. If dekilling is not addressed, AI adoption can create long-term fragility. Another workforce impact is the emergence of new roles and new responsibilities that may not be formally recognized. AI governance often requires people to perform tasks like reviewing use cases, assessing risk evidence, monitoring outputs, investigating incidents, and maintaining decision trails. If these responsibilities are added informally to existing roles, they can become invisible work, which leads to burnout, inconsistent performance, and weak accountability. Beginners should understand that invisible work is risky because it is easy to deprioritize under pressure. Workforce analysis should identify where new governance tasks are landing and whether people have time, training, and authority to perform them well. If not, the organization may need to create clearer role definitions or allocate dedicated capacity. This is not just a staffing issue. It is a control effectiveness issue. Controls that depend on overworked people tend to fail at the worst times, like during incidents or high-stakes releases. An honest workforce analysis helps ensure governance responsibilities are supported rather than assumed. Workforce impacts also include equity and fairness within the organization, because AI adoption can advantage some roles while disadvantaging others depending on who gets training, who gets access, and who is expected to adapt quickly. If only certain teams receive strong guidance, other teams may make more mistakes and face more scrutiny, which creates internal tension. If some people become the unofficial AI experts without recognition or support, they may become bottlenecks or become blamed when problems occur. Beginners should see that internal fairness matters because it affects whether people cooperate with governance. If governance feels like a burden placed on some groups while others bypass it, compliance and trust will erode. Workforce analysis should therefore consider how training and support are distributed, whether expectations are realistic, and whether accountability is applied consistently. When workforce impacts are managed fairly, people are more likely to report problems early, ask questions, and participate in safe practices. That cooperation is a crucial ingredient in reducing harm. To connect workforce analysis back to AI risk management, the key is to treat job shifts, role risks, and capability gaps as risk factors that change likelihood and impact of harm. If roles are redesigned without clear decision boundaries, the likelihood of misuse rises. If training is generic and not role-based, the likelihood of overtrust rises. If dekilling occurs, the impact of tool failure rises because the organization cannot recover quickly. If invisible governance work creates burnout, detection and response controls may weaken, increasing both likelihood and duration of harm. Beginners should notice that workforce impacts are therefore not just a change management topic. They are part of the system's risk profile. A mature governance approach treats workforce factors as measurable and manageable, using signals like training comprehension, escalation rates, review quality, and incident patterns. Even without complex measurement, The organization can observe whether people are making the same mistakes repeatedly and whether processes are being followed realistically. Workforce analysis gives you the insight to adjust controls and training where human factors are creating risk. The central takeaway is that analyzing AI workforce impacts requires looking beyond job replacement headlines and focusing on how work actually changes in production. Job shifts often move people from doing tasks to reviewing and handling exceptions, which can increase cognitive load and invite overtrust if not supported. Role risks appear when incentives, authority, time pressure, and unclear boundaries make unsafe behavior likely, even for capable staff. Capability gaps emerge when people are expected to classify risk, verify outputs, and escalate concerns without the skills or confidence to do so reliably. Deskilling, invisible governance work, and uneven training distribution can create long-term fragility and fairness issues that undermine safety and trust. When you analyze these impacts honestly, you can design governance that matches human reality, not an idealized workflow where everyone has infinite time and perfect judgment. That is how workforce analysis becomes a key part of responsible AI oversight, reducing both the likelihood of harm and the impact when problems inevitably appear.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.